The silver towers of Zalani cities crumbled like glass sculptures under the relentless bombardment from above. Massive alien warships hung in the darkened sky like metal vultures, their weapons painting the horizon with deadly orange light. Each blast sent shockwaves through the ground, toppling the beautiful crystal spires that had taken centuries to grow. Elder Counselor Velith pressed her long, graceful fingers against the emergency communication panel. Her hands shook as she tried to send out their final desperate message to anyone who might listen. The Zalani had never been warriors. They were artists, philosophers, and dreamers who had spent thousands of years creating beauty instead of weapons. Now their peaceful world was dying and they had no way to fight back. Her voice, usually as sweet as flowing water, cracked with emotion as she spoke into the transmitter. "Please, anyone out there, we need help. Our people are dying. Our children have nowhere to run." The words went out into the vast emptiness of space, a tiny cry for help in an ocean of silence. Light years away, Captain Minho was enjoying his morning coffee aboard the human colony ship New Dawn when the alien transmission reached them. He was a seasoned officer who had spent decades exploring the outer rim of human space, but he had never encountered another intelligent species. The bridge crew gathered around as communications officer Hai Jin worked frantically to decode the strange signal. When the translation came through, the entire bridge fell silent. The alien voice was filled with such raw pain and terror that it made grown soldiers uncomfortable. Through the static, they could hear explosions in the background and what sounded like screaming. Hajin's face went pale as she continued translating. The desperate plea? The main screen flickered to life, showing images that would haunt the crew forever. Tall, elegant beings with skin like polished marble were running through burning streets. Their cities looked like works of art, all flowing curves and sparkling towers that seemed to grow from the ground like frozen music. But now those masterpieces were collapsing under a rain of plasma fire. Minho watched families carrying their wounded, saw children no bigger than human toddlers crying over bodies that would never move again. The attackers were different aliens entirely, brutish creatures in dark armor who seemed to enjoy the destruction they were causing. They herded survivors like cattle, loading them onto ships bound for who knows where. The tactical display showed the true horror of the situation. Thousands of enemy warships surrounded the peaceful planet, each one bristling with enough firepower to level a city. The New Dawn was just one ship, equipped for exploration and colony support, not military action. Against such overwhelming force, what could they possibly do? But as Minho watched another group of alien children lose their parents to the bombardment, something cold and hard settled in his stomach. Humans had rules about this kind of thing. They had learned through their own dark history that genocide was never acceptable, no matter who was doing it or why. He turned to his communications officer with steel in his voice. "Hai Jin, open a priority channel to Earth Command. Tell them, we have first contact with 2 alien species, and one of them is committing mass murder against the other." The message would take weeks to reach Earth, but Minho knew his people well enough to predict their response. Humans had a saying about bullies, and it applied whether the victims were human or alien. The sleek diplomatic vessel Harmony tore through the fabric of space-time, emerging from hyperspace with a brilliant flash of blue light. Captain Minho's distress call had reached Earth faster than anyone expected, and the response was immediate. Ambassador Sujin stood on the bridge, watching the alien star system appear on their screens for the first time in human history. What they saw made her heart sink. The once beautiful planets were scarred with massive burn marks visible even from space. Debris fields floated where space stations used to be, and the few remaining Zalani ships limped through space like wounded animals. This wasn't just a war. It was complete annihilation. Sujin had spent her entire career preparing for first contact with alien life. But nothing in the diplomatic handbooks covered a situation like this. Her team of linguists and cultural experts worked around the clock, using the initial transmission from Captain Minho to build translation software that could handle the musical Zalani language. The meeting took place aboard a damaged Zalani, a medical ship that looked more like a floating crystal palace than a military vessel. As Sujin and her team stepped through the airlock, they got their first look at the aliens who had called for help. The Zilani were breathtakingly beautiful. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with skin that seemed to glow from within, their movements were like dancers, flowing and graceful, even in the cramped corridors of their wounded ship. Ambassador. Cathera greeted them with what the translation software interpreted as formal gratitude. Her voice sounded like music, even when filtered through electronic speakers. But Sujin could see the exhaustion in her large silver eyes. This was a being who had watched her entire civilization crumble in a matter of weeks through the newly calibrated translation system. Cathera began explaining the true scope of the disaster. The Korthak Empire hadn't just attacked their homeworld. They had systematically conquered 17 different Zilani colonies. Millions of peaceful aliens had been killed or enslaved, their beautiful cities stripped bare of resources. Before being abandoned to decay, the Zilani showed them recorded footage from the attacks. And Sujin's military advisor, Commander Jae-soon, had to look away. Korthak were bulky, aggressive creatures who seemed to take pleasure in destruction. They would bomb civilian shelters, execute surrendering defenders, and worst of all, they collected Zilani children like trophies. "We are not warriors," Cathara explained, her musical voice heavy with sorrow. "Our people have never known violence or hatred. We create art, we study the stars, we tend our gardens. When the Korthak came, we didn't even understand what they wanted from us." Sujin listened to the translation with growing anger. During the journey from Earth, her team had studied both alien species using the data Captain Minho had collected. The Zilani had evolved on a world so peaceful that they had no natural predators, no dangerous weather, and abundant resources. The concept of organized violence was completely foreign to them. Even more disturbing was what they learned about the Korthak. These aliens had also evolved on a peaceful world, but they had developed aggression through cultural choice rather than biological necessity. They were bullies on a galactic scale, picking on species too gentle to fight back. "We know your people are new to space travel," Cathara continued, her hope barely visible through her despair. "But perhaps you could take some of our children to safety? Or send medical supplies for our wounded? We have nothing left to offer in return, but we would be forever grateful." Sujin looked at Commander Jae-soon, and she could see her own thoughts reflected in his eyes. These aliens had no idea what they had just done by calling Earth for help. The Zilani and Korthak had both evolved on peaceful worlds where survival was easy. They didn't understand that humans came from a place where everything tried to kill you, where survival meant learning to fight back against impossible odds. "We'll help," Sujin promised, her voice steady and calm. She had no idea how prophetic those simple words would turn out to be. The massive battle, Cruza Indomitable, drifted silently through space, its dark hull scarred from decades of service, protecting human colonies. Admiral Wu Jin stood in his private quarters, reading the classified reports that had just arrived from Earth Command. The documents painted a picture so disturbing that even a veteran officer like him felt a chill run down his spine. As commander of humanity's 7th Fleet, Wu Jin had seen his share of conflicts. Pirates, rogue colonies, territorial disputes between human factions. But this was different. This was humanity's first contact with alien life, and it was happening in the middle of a genocide. Dr. Soyoung knocked on his door and entered with a tablet full of analysis data. She was the fleet's chief xenobiologist, a brilliant scientist who had spent years studying theoretical alien evolution. Now, she was faced with the real thing, and her findings were deeply troubling. "Admiral, I finished analyzing the data from Ambassador Sujin's initial contact," she said, setting the tablet on his desk. "Both alien species are completely unprepared for what they're dealing with, including us." Wu Jin poured himself coffee from his personal dispenser, noting how his hands remained steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Explain." Soyoung activated a holographic display showing the evolutionary history of both species. The Zilani evolved on what we would call a paradise world. Low gravity, perfect climate, abundant food sources, and absolutely no natural predators. Their biggest environmental challenge was occasional rain showers. The display shifted to show peaceful, alien landscapes that looked like botanical gardens. Rolling hills covered in strange but beautiful plants, crystal-clear lakes, and cities that grew like living art. It was the kind of world humans dreamed about but had never found. The Korthok developed on an equally gentle moon, Saw Young continued. Artificial atmosphere, controlled climate, resources delivered by automated systems. Neither species ever had to fight for survival. They don't understand violence because they never needed it. Wu Jin studied the data with growing understanding. So the Korthok's aggression is what? Cultural. Exactly. They learned to be bullies. Because it was easy, and no one ever fought back. Think of them as galactic schoolyard bullies who've never encountered someone willing to punch them in the nose. The Admiral walked to his viewport looking out at the stars. And us? Soyoung's voice grew quiet. Sir, if we told them about Earth's conditions, they literally wouldn't believe us. We're talking about species that consider a minor tremor natural disaster. The idea of hurricanes that can level cities, of predators that hunt in coordinated packs, gravity strong enough to crush their bones, it's beyond their comprehension. She pulled up images of Earth's wildlife and weather. Patterns? A single Earth wolf would terrify an entire Korthok battalion. Our house cats are apex predators compared to anything they've ever seen. And that's before we mention volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunamis, ice ages, and meteor impacts. Captain Tae-hun entered the room, having been summoned for the briefing. Commanded the destroyer Vengeance, one of the 7th Fleet's most efficient ships. His reputation for tactical brilliance was matched only by his strict moral code. Admiral Tae-hyun said after reviewing the reports, I'm concerned about our mission parameters. Zalani specifically requested humanitarian aid, medical supplies, refugee transport, basic survival assistance. They're not asking us to fight their war for them. Wu Jin turned from the viewport, his expression hardening with resolve. Captain, let me ask you something. If you saw a group of children being attacked by armed adults, would you limit yourself to providing bandages? Of course not, sir, but the principle is the same, Wu Jin interrupted. Sometimes the most humanitarian thing you can do is permanently remove the threat. Can't heal wounds while someone is still stabbing the patient. Dr. Soyoung nodded slowly. The Zalani don't understand what they've done by contacting us. They think they've called for help from primitive mammals who might spare a few medical supplies. They have no idea they've just awakened something that evolution spent millions of years creating. Captain Tae-han looked uncomfortable. What do you mean, Wu Jin? Smiled grimly. Captain, we're not just another spacefaring species. We're the products of a world that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We didn't just survive. We learned to fight back and win. The Admiral activated the fleet-wide communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Wu Jin. Prepare for immediate deployment to the Zalani system. We have bullies to educate. Space itself seemed to ripple and tear as 27 human warships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zalani territory. The fleet appeared like dark phantoms materializing from nothing, their hulls so black they seemed to swallow the starlight around them. At the center of this impressive formation, Admiral Wu Jin's flagship Indomitable drifted forward with the silent menace of a hunting shark. The Zalani had never seen anything quite like these vessels. Human ships were built differently from both Zalani and Korthok designs. Where Zalani craft looked like floating art pieces and Korthok vessels resembled brutal hammers. Human ships had a predatory elegance. They were clearly built for war. But with an efficiency that spoke of countless battles and hard-won experience, Ambassador Cathara waited nervously aboard the medical station Sanctuary. Surrounded by the remaining leaders of her dying civilization, they had hoped for cargo ships filled with medicine and food, perhaps a few transport vessels to evacuate their most vulnerable citizens. Instead, they found themselves face to face with what was obviously a military fleet. The meeting took place in the medical station's largest conference room, a circular chamber with walls made of the same crystal material that characterized all Zalani architecture. The space was designed for peaceful negotiations and cultural exchanges, not military briefings. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. Admiral Wu Jin entered with a small escort, his uniform crisp and his bearing confident. He moved with the controlled grace of someone accustomed to command, but there was something else in his manner that made the Zilani nervous. Lieutenant Dajin accompanied him as translator, her equipment already calibrated to handle the musical complexity of Zilani speech. Admiral Kethera began, her voice carrying the strain of recent losses. We are deeply grateful that your species responded to our plea for help. But we must admit confusion. We requested medical supplies and perhaps transport for our refugees. Your vessels appear to be designed for combat. The translation software converted her melodic tones into flat human speech, but the underlying bewilderment came through clearly. Around the conference table, other Zilani leaders shifted uncomfortably, their large silver eyes reflecting the same confusion. They are warships, Wu Jin confirmed without hesitation. His directness seemed to surprise the aliens who were accustomed to more diplomatic language even in crisis situations. Lieutenant Dajin carefully translated the Admiral's words, adding contextual notes to help the Zilani understand human communication patterns. The aliens exchanged glances that clearly indicated they were struggling to process this response. We don't understand, Kethera said slowly. How does bringing weapons help heal our wounded? We need doctors, not soldiers. We need medicine, not missiles. Admiral Wu Jin walked to the chamber's central display, which showed a three-dimensional map of Zilani space. Red markers indicated Korthok fleet positions scattered throughout the system like a disease. The tactical situation was clear to any military mind. The Zilani were completely surrounded and outgunned. Ambassador Kethera, he said, his voice patient but firm. Imagine a patient dying from a massive infection. You can bandage the wounds and treat the symptoms. But until you eliminate the source of the infection, the patient will continue to deteriorate. The Zilani leader tilted her elegant head, trying to follow the metaphor. Her species thought in artistic and philosophical terms, not military ones. Sometimes healing requires surgery, Wu Jin continued, gesturing at the Korthok positions. Sometimes you must cut away the diseased tissue before the patient can recover. The Korthok are the infection. Until they're removed, any aid we provide will be temporary at best. The other Zilani council members whispered among themselves in their musical language. Concepts like preemptive strike and strategic warfare were completely foreign to them. Their idea of combat was limited to desperate defensive actions when absolutely cornered. But surely negotiation, one elder began, has failed, Wu Jin interrupted gently. They've already conquered 17 of your worlds. They're not interested in peace talks. The Admiral's expression hardened with resolve. We will engage the Korthok forces and eliminate them as a threat. Once your system is secure, we'll provide every bit of humanitarian aid you require. But first, we deal with the bullies. The Zilani sat in stunned silence, realizing they had contacted something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The massive Korthok command ship Dominion hung in space like a floating fortress, its golden hull gleaming with the arrogance of a species that had never faced real opposition. Supreme Commander Vashtar sat on his elevated command throne, surrounded by holographic displays showing his vast fleet scattered throughout Zilani, space like a conquering swarm. When the human message arrived, the bridge crew burst into laughter. The translation came through their systems in perfect Korthok military language, which should have been impossible for a species they had never encountered before. But the content was even more amusing than the technical achievement. Withdraw from Zilani space within 72 standard hours, or face immediate military action, message stated in simple, direct terms. No diplomatic flourishes, no requests for negotiation, just a flat ultimatum delivered like a fact of nature. Vashtar's mandibles clicked together in what passed for Korthok laughter. He was an impressive figure even by his species standards, standing nearly 10 feet tall, with thick armor plating that had been ceremonially decorated with the symbols of conquered worlds. The Zilani crystals woven into his uniform caught the bridge lighting, a deliberate reminder of his recent victories. His tactical officers shared his amusement, their own mandibles clicking in harmony. The strategic display showed the situation clearly: fewer than 30 human vessels against over 4,000 Korthok ships. The numbers were so ridiculous that several officers wondered if the message was some kind of elaborate joke. At their ships, Commander Nexfell pointed to the long-range sensor readings. Primitive metal hulls, no decorative elements, battle damage that hasn't been properly repaired. These mammals fly around in scrap metal. Human vessels did look crude compared to Korthok elegance. Korthok ships were works of art. Flowing curves covered in precious metals and victory trophies. Human ships appeared purely functional. Their dark hulls were scarred from countless battles, patched with different alloys and completely lacking in aesthetic appeal. They probably don't even understand the concept of honorable surrender, another officer added. Primitive species. Never do. Vashtar raised one clawed hand for silence. Send a response to these ... mammals. Tell them that the Korthok Empire does not negotiate with inferior species. If they wish to die protecting their new pets, we will accommodate them. The bridge crew roared their approval, anticipating an easy victory that would add human trophies to their collection. Some were already planning how they would display captured human weapons in their personal quarters, but the human response came 12 hours earlier than expected. It came in a way that changed everything. The first sign something was wrong was when the proximity alarms started screaming. A small human ship had somehow appeared directly alongside the Dominion without triggering any of their sensor systems. One moment space was empty, the next moment a sleek predator hung just outside their shields. Impossible, whispered the sensor. Officer, our detection grid covers everything within 100,000 kilometers. Nothing can get through without us knowing. The ship was smaller than a Korthok escort vessel, but there was something unsettling about its design. It moved with a fluid grace that reminded Vashtar of Depotion predators, sliding through space as if it belonged there. Commander Bior's voice came through their communication system with disturbing clarity. Her tone was calm, almost conversational, as if discussing the weather rather than delivering a military ultimatum. This is your final warning, she said simply. Withdraw or be destroyed. Before anyone on the Korthok bridge could respond, the human ship vanished. Not into hyperspace with the usual energy signature, but gone as if it had never existed. The sensor operators frantically checked their equipment, but found no trace of the vessel's departure. Find them, Dar roared, his amusement replaced. By growing anger, deploy all fighters. I want that ship found and destroyed. But as his tactical officers scrambled to respond, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. A small probe had been left behind, attached to their hull so precisely that it must have been placed during the brief encounter. The probe's message downloaded directly into their computer systems before anyone could stop it.
Ow.
What they saw made the entire bridge fall silent. Complete technical specifications of the Dominion filled their screens. Shield frequencies that were classified at the highest levels. Weapon placement that was supposed to be secret. Internal layout that no outsider should know. Even personal information about the crew that existed only in sealed military files, for the first time in his long military career. Supreme Commander Vashtar felt something his species had nearly forgotten through generations of easy victories. The cold touch of genuine fear crept up his spine as he realized. They weren't dealing with primitive mammals at all they had just encountered. Something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. The human ship Mercy drifted slowly through the debris field where a Zalani refugee convoy had been ambushed 3 days earlier. From a distance, she looked exactly like what her name suggested, a medical vessel with bright red crosses. Painted on her white hull, and emergency lights flashing in the universal pattern for humanitarian aid, Captain Yangsu stood on his bridge, watching the Korthok patrol ships approach on the tactical display. His crew moved with quiet efficiency around him, their actions coordinated like members of a hunting pack who had worked together for years. The ship's medical bay was indeed fully equipped to treat wounded civilians, but that wasn't her only purpose. Enemy vessels closing to optimal attack range, reported his tactical officer. They're forming up in standard Korthok attack formation. 3 heavy cruisers in a line, fighters spread in escort positions. Young-Su nodded calmly. The Korthok were doing exactly what their military doctrine demanded, approaching in a rigid, predictable formation that looked impressive, but left them vulnerable to anyone who understood three-dimensional combat. Had obviously never faced opponents who didn't follow the same rulebook. "Wait for it," Young-Soo murmured, watching the enemy ships close in. The Korthok commanders were probably congratulating themselves on catching a helpless medical ship, alone and undefended. They had no idea what they were walking into. The first Korthok plasma blasts struck the Mercy's shields, expecting to punch through the light defenses of a hospital ship. Instead, the energy beams simply vanished into defensive barriers strong, enough to stop asteroids. The Korthok formation hesitated, confused by their target's unexpected resilience. That moment of hesitation was all Young-Soo needed. "All weapons, reveal and fire," he ordered quietly. "Implement medical protocols, surgical precision only." The Mercy's hull seemed to bloom like a deadly flower as hidden weapon ports opened along her entire length. What the Korthok had thought was a helpless medical ship suddenly bristled with enough firepower to level a city. But these weren't crude bombardment weapons. They were precision instruments, designed to remove threats with surgical accuracy. "All fighter squadrons launch and implement Tundra Wolf formation," Young-Soo continued. "Lieutenant Commander Myung, take your pack and show them how Earth Wolves hunt." The human fighters that poured from the Mercy's hidden bays moved like nothing the Korthok had ever seen. Instead of the formal squadron attacks they expected, the humans scattered into small groups that seemed to operate with a shared intelligence. They moved like predators, using instincts refined by millions of years of pack hunting. Myung led her wing in a complex dance of attack and retreat that completely baffled the Korthok pilots. Human fighters would swoop in from unexpected angles, deliver precise strikes to disable rather than destroy, then vanish before return fire could find them. But they never truly left, like wolves following wounded prey. They tracked every damaged enemy ship with relentless patience. The Korthok formation, trained for rigid hierarchy and predictable tactics, couldn't adapt to opponents who treated combat like a hunting expedition. Their pilots kept trying to reform their neat lines, while human fighters harassed them from all directions, always striking at the weakest points with surgical precision. "Target the lead cruiser's engine section," Myung called to her wingman. "Wound it first, then let it bleed." The human attack was methodical and terrifying. They didn't try to destroy enemy ships outright. Instead, they disabled engines, knocked out weapons, damaged life support systems. The Korthok ships found themselves helpless and drifting, waiting for the killing blow that never came immediately. Instead, human fighters would circle their victims like sharks, delivering precise strikes to worsen existing damage. The effect was devastating. Korthok crews found themselves trapped in slowly dying ships, listening to their hulls groan and their systems fail one by one. Within 6 hours, the entire Korthok patrol fleet was either destroyed or drifting helplessly. In space, the few survivors who managed to escape transmitted reports that would haunt Korthok commanders for years to come. They described enemies who seemed to enjoy combat, crews who laughed while ramming damaged vessels instead of retreating to safety. "Human fighters operate like pack predators," one traumatized Korthok pilot reported. "They don't just defeat you, they play with you first. They're not soldiers, they're hunters, and we're the prey." Admiral Wu Jin reviewed the tactical reports from his flagship with grim satisfaction. The first phase was complete, and the results exceeded all expectations. The Korthok were learning what it meant to face opponents who had evolved on a world where everything wanted to kill them. The hunt had officially begun. The communication channels of the Korthok Empire crackled with panicked reports that grew more desperate by the hour. What had started as isolated incidents was now a full-scale nightmare spreading through their ranks like a plague. Supreme Commander Vashtar sat in his command chair, watching his mighty fleet dissolve into chaos as impossible stories poured in from every front. The assault carrier Retribution had become a legend of terror among Korthok forces. Captain Jin'e commanded this floating fortress with the cold efficiency of a surgeon, but her specialty was a kind of surgery that left enemies questioning everything they thought they knew about warfare. When Korthok ships suffered hull breaches, their crews evacuated immediately. Space was death. Everyone knew that. But human marines seemed to thrive in the vacuum, moving through damaged enemy vessels like ghosts in their sleek combat suits. They would cut through twisted metal and sparking electronics as if navigating familiar terrain, hunting down Korthok survivors with methodical precision. The most disturbing reports came from Korthok crews who had been rescued from disabled ships. They described humans moving through airless corridors without any sign of distress. Their breathing calm and steady even in conditions that would kill most galactic species within minutes. Some humans had even removed their helmets and damaged sections, breathing recycled atmosphere that barely qualified as survivable. They don't just survive in space, one traumatized Korthok officer reported. They're comfortable there, like they evolved for it. But if Captain Janae's boarding actions were terrifying, Commander Han Wu's destroyer squadron was something else entirely. His ships had earned a reputation that made even veteran Korthok captains abandon their posts rather than face them. In battle, the first incident had occurred near the Zalani colony of Cathara Prime, where 10 Korthok heavy cruisers had cornered 3 human destroyers. By all military logic, the humans should have retreated or surrendered. Instead, they had done something that defied every principle of civilized warfare. They had rammed the enemy ships, not as a last resort, not in desperation, but as an opening. Move. Han Wu's flagship had accelerated directly into the lead Korthok vessel, its reinforced prow tearing through armor plating like paper. The human crew had actually been cheering as their ship carved through the enemy formation, their battle. Cries audible over the communication channels. The psychological impact was devastating. Korthok warriors were trained to fight until victory or honorable death. But they had never encountered opponents who treated their own potential destruction as entertainment. Human crews would laugh while ramming damaged vessels, treating suicidal tactics as if they were playing some kind of sport. Sir Vashtar's intelligence officer said, his voice shaking as he delivered the latest analysis. We've been studying the human combat patterns, and I'm afraid our initial assessment was completely wrong. The intelligence officer was an old veteran who had analyzed dozens of species during the Korthok Empire's expansion. His mandibles clicked nervously as he activated the holographic display showing human tactical behavior. These beings didn't develop advanced military doctrine, he continued. They evolved it. Every single combat instinct they display comes from millions of years of surviving on a planet that was actively trying to kill them. The display showed Earth's environmental conditions, and several Korthok officers actually stepped backward in horror. Hurricanes that could level cities, predators that hunted in coordinated packs, gravity that would crush Korthok bones, temperatures that swung from freezing to blazing within seasonal cycles. Combat isn't warfare to them, the intelligence officer whispered. It's Tuesday. They treat battles like we treat routine maintenance. They've been fighting for survival every single day of their evolutionary history. Vashtar stared at the tactical display showing human forces systematically dismantling his empire's military infrastructure. Entire battle groups were retreating in disorder, their commanders reporting that fighting humans was like trying to battle natural disasters, given intelligence and purpose. The reports grew more disturbing with each passing hour. Human ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting with massive hull breaches. Human crews that should have died from radiation exposure kept working in conditions that killed other species instantly. Human fighters that should have run out of ammunition somehow kept attacking with improvised weapons. They don't fight like a military, one fleeing Korthok commander reported. They fight like evolution's most successful predators. Every tactical decision they make assumes they're going to win because losing means extinction. Vashtar finally understood the true horror of their situation. They weren't fighting another galactic military with predictable strategies and logical limitations. They were fighting something that had survived everything the universe could throw at it. Something that had turned survival itself into an art form. Send word to all commanders, he ordered quietly, his voice heavy with defeat. A general withdrawal from all human-occupied systems.
Now we're not fighting a military, we're fighting evolution's apex predators.
The Korthok Empire's greatest military machine began its retreat, leaving behind the shattered remains of their reputation and the terrifying knowledge that humanity was now loose in the galaxy. The neutral meeting took place aboard the Zalani Station Haven, a beautiful crystal structure that had somehow survived the war intact. The conference room was designed for peaceful negotiations, its walls made of translucent materials that caught and reflected light in soothing patterns. Today, however, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Supreme Commander Vashtar entered. With only 2 bodyguards, his once magnificent armor now looking shabby and worn. The proud warrior who had commanded thousands of ships just weeks ago now moved like a broken man. His mandibles clicked nervously as he took his seat across from Admiral Wu Jin, unable to meet the human's steady gaze. The contrast between the 2 commanders was striking. Where Vashtar appeared defeated and desperate, Admiral Wu Jin sat with the calm confidence of someone who held all the winning cards. His uniform was crisp, his bearing relaxed, and his eyes held the kind of certainty that came from complete tactical superiority. Supreme Commander Wu Jin began, his voice carrying no malice, but absolute authority. I'm offering you one final opportunity to end this conflict peacefully. Your forces will withdraw completely from all Zalani territory within 48 hours. Vashtar's translator device converted the Admiral's words into Korthok military standard. But the meaning was clear in any language. This wasn't a negotiation. It was the dictation of surrender terms. Additionally, Wu Jin continued, your empire will provide full reparations for the damage inflicted on Zalani worlds. Medical supplies, construction materials, whatever they need to rebuild what you destroyed? The Korthok commander's claws scraped nervously against the table's crystal surface. Admiral, surely we can reach some middle ground. Perhaps a partial withdrawal or shared occupation? No, Wu Jin interrupted simply. Complete withdrawal. And I want to be very clear about something else. Any future aggression against the Zalani, or any other peaceful species, will result in the permanent removal of your civilization from this galaxy. The threat was delivered in the same conversational tone one might use to discuss the weather, which somehow made it even more terrifying. Vashtar SSA's bodyguards shifted uncomfortably, their hands moving instinctively toward weapons they knew would be useless. You cannot possibly monitor our entire empire, Vashtar said, his voice cracking slightly. Once your fleet leaves this system, how will you know what we do in our own territory? Captain Suben looked up from her position at the tactical display, where she had been quietly tracking Korthok fleet movements throughout the galaxy. Her expression was almost pitying as she answered, Supreme Commander, I think you misunderstand. Something fundamental about human nature. We don't leave. She activated the holographic display, showing real-time positions of human ships throughout former Korthok territory. Vashtar stared in growing horror as he realized the scope of what he was seeing. Humans don't abandon people, we've decided. To protect, Suben continued. We've established permanent patrol routes through Zalani space. We've positioned monitoring stations at strategic points throughout your empire. We've recruited volunteers from dozens of species you've oppressed. Over the years, the display zoomed in to show human installations being constructed on former Korthok worlds. Defensive platforms appearing at critical jump points, and most disturbing of all, entire populations that had risen up against their Korthok oppressors. Once they learned humanity was backing them, Admiral Wu Jin stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. What happens next is entirely up to you, Supreme Commander. You can accept these terms and rebuild your civilization as a peaceful member of the galactic community. Or you can reject them and discover what happens when humans stop being polite. The demonstration that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. Human ships appeared simultaneously at 17 different Korthok military installations. Moving with the coordinated precision of a single organism, they didn't announce their presence or demand surrender. They simply began dismantling everything that could be considered a military asset. Korthok defense platforms were reduced to component atoms by human weapons that fired faster than thought. Shipyards that had built vessels for centuries were carefully disassembled. Their workers evacuated before the facilities vanished into recycled materials. Military academies found their students safely relocated while their buildings were efficiently demolished. The most impressive part wasn't the destruction itself, but the surgical precision with which it was carried out. Civilian areas remained completely untouched. Medical facilities continued operating. Schools stayed open. The humans were carefully separating the Korthok military machine from the civilization it had controlled. Captain Suben provided running commentary as she tracked the operation from Haven Station. Battle Group 7 has neutralized the shipyards. At Korth Prime, Battle Group 3 has dismantled the orbital defense network around Vashkal. All military personnel are being given the opportunity to surrender and retrain for civilian occupations. Within one standard week, the Korthok Empire's military capacity was reduced to patrol boats, suitable only for defending against pirates. An interstellar power that had dominated entire sectors for generations had been systematically neutered by opponents who treated the complete restructuring of galactic politics like routine maintenance work. Supreme Commander Vashtar watched his life's work disappear with the efficiency of a medical procedure, finally understanding that he had awakened something far beyond his comprehension. The humans hadn't just won a war, they had performed galactic surgery, removing a cancer while leaving the healthy tissue intact. "Do we have an agreement, Supreme Commander?" Admiral Wujin asked politely. Vashtar's answer was barely a whisper. Yes. 3 months had passed since the Korthok Empire's military machine was systematically dismantled, and the Zalani system had transformed beyond recognition. Where once there had been burning cities and refugee camps, there were construction sites, buzzing with activity, and medical stations treating the last of the wounded survivors. Ambassador Sujin stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Zalani Capital Station, watching human cargo ships deliver the final shipments of humanitarian aid. The vessels were massive, their holds packed with everything from advanced medical equipment to prefabricated housing units designed specifically for Zalani physiology. But these weren't just supply runs. They were the foundation of something much larger. Elder Counselor Velith approached with the graceful movements typical of her species. But there was something different about her bearing now. The desperate fear that had marked their first meeting had been replaced by a mixture of gratitude and carefully respectful wariness. Ambassador Velith said, her musical voice carrying complex harmonies that the translation software rendered as formal politeness. "We cannot adequately express our gratitude for what your species has done for us." Sujin smiled warmly, gesturing toward the bustling activity visible through the transparent walls. "We're just happy we could help." "How are the reconstruction efforts progressing?" "Beyond our wildest hopes," Velith admitted. "Your engineers have helped us rebuild 17 cities in the time it would have taken us to plan one. Your medical teams have saved thousands of lives we thought were lost forever. Your agricultural specialists have restored farmland we believed would be barren for generations." The elder counselor paused, her large silver eyes reflecting the starlight streaming through the station's crystal walls. "But I must confess something that troubles our leadership. We thought we were asking primitive mammals for basic medical supplies and perhaps refugee transport. Instead, we awakened something that has completely reshaped galactic politics." Captain Minho joined the conversation, having just arrived from his new assignment, commanding the permanent human embassy ship. His vessel, the Friendship, was designed for long-term diplomatic missions and carried everything from cultural exchange programs to emergency response capabilities. "We prefer to think of it as making new friends," Minho said with characteristic human directness. "And humanity takes friendship very seriously. When someone asks us for help, we don't do things halfway." Velith's expression showed the kind of complex emotion that required musical language to properly express. "Captain, your species' definition of help included the complete military neutralization of a galactic empire. You didn't just provide aid, you eliminated the source of our suffering entirely." The truth was becoming clear throughout the galaxy. Word of humanity's intervention had spread like wildfire through diplomatic channels. Carried by refugees, survivors, and the few Korthok military personnel who had been allowed to retire to civilian life, the story grew with each telling, but the core facts remained unchanged. Earth's children didn't fight like other species, didn't negotiate with bullies or accept compromise solutions when innocents were suffering. When humans offered to help, they meant it with the full weight of their civilization behind them. even if that meant dismantling entire interstellar empires. The Galactic Council had been forced to establish entirely new diplomatic protocols specifically for dealing with what they formally classified as apex predator species. The bureaucrats struggled to understand beings who treated interstellar warfare as a minor inconvenience and considered the complete reconstruction of civilizations to be standard humanitarian aid. Other species had begun sending diplomatic missions to Sol, though their motivations varied wildly. Some sought alliance with these terrifyingly effective protectors. Others simply hoped to avoid humanity's attention entirely. A few brave civilizations even requested human assistance with their own oppression problems. Though they were careful to specify exactly what kind of help they wanted, the Vegan Republic had asked for human mediation in their trade disputes, then nearly fainted when Admiral Wu Jin suggested simply removing the problematic trade barriers by force. The Centauri Mining Consortium had requested protection from pirates, then discovered that human patrol ships didn't just drive off raiders, they tracked them back to their bases and eliminated the entire criminal organization, we've learned. Something important about our new human friends, Beloth told the gathered Zilani leadership during their weekly council meeting. Never mistake their kindness for weakness. When humans smile and offer to help, they mean it completely and absolutely. Captain Minho had made it clear that humanity's protection of Zilani space was permanent, not temporary. Human patrol ships now regularly swept through the system, their crews treating the defense of alien civilians as a natural extension of their moral code. Human advisors worked alongside Zilani administrators, helping rebuild not just cities but entire governmental structures. Most importantly, human engineers were teaching Zilani designers how to build defensive systems, how to organize planetary militias, and how to recognize the early warning signs of imperial aggression. We're creating a civilization that would never again be helpless in the face of bullies. In the end, Zilani had asked for aid from beings they thought were primitive mammals who might spare some medical supplies. Instead, they had contacted evolution's most successful predators. Creatures who had spent millions of years learning that the best defense was an overwhelming offense. The Deathworlders had indeed sent a fleet of doom. But that doom fell only on those who threatened the innocent. For everyone else, humanity's arrival meant something much simpler. They had made new friends. And humans took friendship very seriously indeed.